this conversation I'm having with Phil Rose, yes, there is another Phil Rose in the world, you might say, but we found out we really do both do the similar things. Phil runs Clarity Leadership. He's worked at Microsoft previously. He started life in a sales and marketing background, but actually realized his passion is around people and leadership. You hear that coming out when he talks about his words around inspiration. We talk about what principles guide leadership. And actually, ultimately, he shares his thoughts on what advice he would give an upcoming leader on how to become an even better leader. As always, listen out to what you might take from it. There's only so many nuggets that you get from Phil in this journey. I've met Phil a number of times. We've actually worked in the same hotel, in different rooms with different clients, but actually it's really great to hear his voice and what he has to say about bringing leadership to life. His business, Clarity Leadership, helps do that for a number of organizations, and he's got a great team of people that really help bring this together, so he can share that and build that common ethos. Now, as I always say, I can't hold you to account for what you're doing in your leadership role. What I can do is help you listen, help you share, help you develop your knowledge. So who do you think you could share this podcast with, where they might get some benefit from it, where they might be able to share some knowledge? And ultimately, we can all help change the world, because actually that's what that common purpose is, when we can all start working together to build something better in the future. Enjoy the show, share it with who you can, and let me know your thoughts. It's always good to find out what you think of it, so we can build more of this. But more importantly, enjoy the conversation of Phil Rose and Phil Rose. Welcome back to the Sparks by Ignium podcast. I'm Phil Rose, the host, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Phil Rose. Yes, there are two of us in the world. Phil and I met through a passion for running. I say that because we might explore that in a bit to come. And what I want to do today was to talk about some of the avenues that Phil's taken around leadership, what's brought him to where he is, and obviously, because with the Sparks by Ignium podcast, talking about purpose and how that brings your business to life and rekindles your passion for your business or reignites your fire. So Phil, welcome to the Sparks by Ignium podcast.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Phil.
Yeah, nice to see you. It's going to be funny, isn't it? I always remember when I bumped into you in a room in a hotel, I think in Ascot, and we were both running similar events.
I remember it. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's where I do the same type of work as you do in a sense. But Phil, you run, you're CEO and co-founder of Clarity.
Yep.
Tell us a bit about what Clarity is before we start in that case.
So Clarity Leadership is a business I founded with my wife, nearly 15 years ago. Our mission in life is to develop leaders and teams who drive business performance for a better world. And there are three things that typically we do, which is leadership development programs, team development programs, and executive coaching.
Perfect. Okay.
So yeah, that's who Clarity are.
Yeah. And I love that, leadership, team, and executive coaching, because eventually, the world needs that. And I wonder, what was it that got you into this in the first place? Where did you come from to get to where you were 15 years ago with the vision that you needed to form this business called Clarity?
So I guess I'd go back, and in the early 90s, I joined Microsoft as a trainer in their tech support department in the UK.
Okay.
I think I was one of the first, if not the first, full-time trainer outside of the US that Microsoft recruited. And I love delivering training programs. And but at Microsoft, I soon realized that if you wanted to get on, sales and marketing was the place to be. So after a couple of years of doing that, I left to go into sales and marketing roles.
Okay.
I was at Microsoft for 10 years. And I love Microsoft, still do. I've got a massive passion for the organization and loved working there. My challenge was that I'm not particularly inspired by technology. Technology is not my bag. So people are, but technology is not. So when you're working for a technology company, that's quite a challenge. So I decided to leave because it is leadership and team development that really inspires me. So I decided to leave. But frankly, at that point, I didn't have the courage to start my own business.
Okay.
We'd also got a young family. My wife was a full-time mum. And so we were dependent on my salary. So I felt like we needed some security. So I joined another training organization with the intention of taking 2 years before I start my own business. Right. It took 7.
Always the case, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that then led you into forming your own business 7 years later, effectively.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You mentioned, you said about, you still have a love for Microsoft. And it's interesting because I started a big company. I started at Rolls-Royce many years ago. And I often say to people, I loved working in Rolls-Royce. And people say, why did you leave? And it's really interesting hearing what you just said there, that, you had a passion for people and leadership, the company you love, but it wasn't the passion for technology that was there.
Yeah, no. So I didn't feel I could be a great sales rep if I wasn't actually interested in the technology.
Yeah.
And you said that. Yeah, that was the challenge. So I don't think I was performing at my very best towards the end, because I wasn't passionate about enterprise technology.
Yeah, and actually, you do have to have that passion, don't you? You always say that a good salesman can sell anything, but you do have to have a passion for what you're selling.
I think
you can do it properly.
Yeah,
I agree. So tell me, so leadership and development, or leadership and team development in that case, was that what Clarity was founded around right at the beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say we were most probably better known for our team development programs. Our team development program is called Unstoppable Teams. Mm-hmm. And we've then not branched out, but we've found that because we work across a number of different industries and different sectors, there was an opportunity. We created a high potential leadership program.
Okay.
The way in which I describe it's like a 1-year mini MBA, and we take typically 2 people from some of the companies that we work with, which are the likes of Microsoft, Vodafone, Pfizer, Bayer, Nestle, BP, and others, typically large corporations, but not always. And we have a maximum of 16 people on that program each year.
Okay.
And they went through a leadership program, which was focused on their leadership skills, their commercial skills, and their impact and gravitas. And so from there, and we started that in 2012. We've kind of branched, and we now deliver a lot of leadership development programs
for larger organizations primarily.
Yes, typically, yes.
Okay. So what is it in terms of that leadership development? What is it do you think sparked your imagination and willingness to go into that realm? Having worked in a company like Microsoft, what was it led you down that route of leadership and team development?
I think, well, firstly, I would attend some of the programs or something similar to what we now deliver. And I would go, look, there's a lot of time being invested in this room. If you take a typical 2-day offsite, if you've got 10, 12 people in the room, you've got 24 days worth of time that's being invested in that experience. And I often thought that there wasn't a great return on that time invested. So there was not in an arrogant way, I don't think, but there was a kind of thing where I go, do you know what, I think I could do this, and I think, frankly, I could most probably do a better job that would impact the business more. So that was one of the drivers. And then the other driver, I think, is, and we've all experienced great leaders and not so great leaders, that often people will talk about, you'll always remember your favorite teacher. I think the same applies to leadership. And you'll always remember your favorite leader. And I think a great leader's got that ability to get that discretionary effort. And I don't think, if you want to be a teacher, you've got to go through teacher training. If you want to be a leader, you don't have to go through leadership training. And so I think there's definitely a need to help coach, develop leaders to be the best and inspire their teams.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? I'm going to come back to you in a minute and ask you the obvious question, your obvious leader, obvious favourite leader. So think about that for a second. But in terms of that leadership development, teacher development, I was with a company this morning and we were talking about, is the owner of the business, who's been running it for 25 years, is he a good leader, or is he just passionate about his subject? And actually the conclusion is he's very passionate about his subject, and he's never been a great leader in his own view. And of course, the company's got to where it is now through hard work, but not necessarily great leadership. And it comes back to that question: are great leaders born, or are great leaders made through the time and people they work with? And I think there's a lot to be said for that in terms of leadership can be developed, and a lot of people fall into it because they've reached the level in their organization of their incompetence, or whatever the words might be.
If I don't think great leadership can be developed, I'm in the wrong bloody business, frankly. So, I absolutely. Have people got some natural skills? Of course they have. But also it's like anything, that you can develop that skill if you practice it, and you're not going to get everything right, but that skill can be developed. And I think it's around mindset and intent as much as anything else. And if you can help the leaders focus on the importance of their role, and the duty that they have to their teams, then I think that's an important element.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that word duty actually? And I always think about some of the work of Ken Blanchard with servant leadership, in that terms of having a duty to your team.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said for that. A lot of people, we use that word servant leadership and you hear it around, but actually you are there to serve at some level and to lead in the same breath.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. It can be a lonely place to be, and I think so. Just having those conversations about what's working, what's not, and how do you get even better. Yeah. That's a good place to be.
Yeah, and I agree. So let's come back to that thing about favorite leaders. I can think of a couple for me that are from my past, but if you think back to your time developing yourself to get where you are now, who are the leaders that stand out for you that you've either worked for or know of, that you would say, this is a person who's either inspired me or given me the incentive to do what I do today?
So I'm going to embarrass him now, but so the leader, basically, I'm going to talk about the best boss I had was a guy called Chris Lewis.
Okay.
I'm fortunate enough now that Chris is part of our team. So he's one of the coaches at Clarity.
Wow. Okay.
So he no longer works at, but I've had this conversation with him before, and Chris inspired me because he set high standards, and I wouldn't. He wasn't, he wasn't an easy boss in terms of, you knew you had to be at your very best. So I like leaders that set high standards and demand excellence. But at the same time, they got a human touch. So so that there was, we could have a laugh and a joke with Chris, but there was also a line that you couldn't cross. And I really respected that. So there was a phrase that was used about him that people would call across broken glass for him, and I kind of got into that in terms of he got discretionary effort out of me, because of who he was, what he stood for, and how he led our team.
Yeah, wow. And I love to think about people crawl across broken glass for him, because I think that says a lot about the individual and his leadership style, and combining that with setting high standards as well. Yeah,
I didn't want to let him down.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he most probably wouldn't have looked at it like that, but I wanted to impress him because I admired him.
Yeah.
And so you try and do your very best because he set high standards.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think there's a lot of Chris Lewises out there who aren't recognised for their leadership ability, and while they're in the company, and people say afterwards, "Oh, that was a great boss." And I think back to my days at Rolls-Royce. And I worked for two very good leaders, one of whom is now dead, unfortunately, many years later. But he was a great leader, and he really pulled a team together when it needed to. He set a vision. He also had a sense of humor, which you needed to have to work in the team we were in at the time, because it was a tough environment.
Yeah.
And some of the other things I think he worked with, he also pushed back. And I think that was one of the things I saw him do, push back on demands that were met of or placed on the team, which he felt were unreasonable.
Yeah.
He was still setting high standards, but he was able to say, no, that's not appropriate. And I think some leaders need to do more of that, push back and give their view that, hey, this isn't appropriate or this is appropriate. And that's what this guy used to do for us. So I wanted to think about the word purpose as well. And we haven't used that word yet, but obviously this podcast is all around the world of purpose. And I was talking to a prospective client recently, and I said to him, look, before we agree to do anything, I just want to check on what's your purpose in business. And he gave me his view. So I want to touch base. Where does purpose sit in that world of leadership development for you?
Well, let me take a step back in it, because it's an important part, and I think it's one of the reasons what's led me to do what I do. I remember being in Seattle. I was hosting. This is whilst I was at Microsoft, Phil. I was hosting some clients at what we had as an executive briefing center out in Seattle, and I was hosting some clients out there, in the middle of the night one night. Now it could have been through jet lag, but I don't think it was. I kind of just woke up because I had been challenging myself. Am I doing what I really want to do? And it was one of those moments where the light bulb went on, and I thought, that's it. I know what my purpose is, and I scribbled, and I'm not known for my writing ability, and I scribbled a load of notes about what my purpose was, and all of a sudden, everything became clearer about what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. That wasn't a purpose about leadership. That was more about a purpose about how I wanted to lead my life.
Yeah. Okay.
So then what that led me to do was frankly leave Microsoft. That was one of the catalysts to going, right, well, if I'm going to live a purpose-led life like this, I'm not doing that in the role that I'm doing today.
Okay.
So that was one of the reasons why I left and to fulfill the purpose that I'd like to think that I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And so I think, in terms of importance to me, I think it's everything.
Yeah.
Because it helps me align. It gives me a freedom today to go, right, well, am I living my purpose? If I am, great. And are the activities that I do on a daily, weekly, yearly basis, are they in line with my purpose? If they are, fabulous. I'm a happy, content, fulfilled person. If they're not, then I need to change. And I think that's why today I do feel a very happy, content, and fulfilled person.
That's interesting. So you don't need to do this, but are you willing to share what your purpose is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's to inspire people, particularly my friends and family.
Okay.
Through my enjoyment for life and worldwide experiences.
Wow. Inspire people through friends and family through life and worldwide experiences. I love that. You're going to laugh now. So I have a purpose, and my purpose is one word. I started working on purpose in 2010. I remember it specifically working with a lady called Suki in a cafe somewhere in Kensington High Street it was, and she worked on purpose. So I sat down with her, and when she worked with me, I remember bursting into tears at some stage in the conversation because it suddenly came to me what it was.
Yeah.
And the purpose she came up with was the word to help. And I played with that word to help. And I felt tearful about it, felt really emotional about it, because I thought that's what I need, that's what coaching's all about. But then it dawned on me that wasn't my real purpose. And I was off track because to help became too passive. And my purpose, I played with that word for a good few years afterwards, thinking what it was. And there were loads of words that went underneath it, which is what I love. You've got your sentence underneath. And then I was running the London Marathon one year in fancy dress, which I started doing in 2016. Because I decided it was easy running a marathon, I need to make it harder. And I was running the streets of London, and I saw kids on the side of the street. And it still makes me feel emotional now about it. And for me, what I realized is my purpose was to inspire. And I started playing with that word, to inspire, because for me, I realized what I was doing was inspiring other people to do things differently. So the bit for me about running the London Marathon in fancy dress was making people realize that they could do this as well.
So clearly there's some similarities there, and I think it's therefore my people's. I will inspire people by role modeling what and you're doing the same, right? So and my role modeling was through my enjoyment of life. I love it. I don't take life that seriously. We're here for a short period of time, and I'm here for a good time rather than necessarily a long time. And worldwide experiences. I think it's a wonderful, beautiful world out there, and I want to take the biggest bite out of it as I possibly can.
Yeah, I love that. And this thing is, isn't it? I work with people around their vision, and one of the things I say to people is, a lot of people talk about the model I use is 5 Fs, and I always add one extra on it, and that extra add is the word fun, because my belief is if you're not having fun, stop doing it. Yeah. And I don't use the same words as you, but I mean the same thing in that sense. There's a great sign out there. Look, you've got to have fun, and I think from a leadership perspective, you need to bring that side of it into. That's what drives people's passion. If you haven't got that, you're not going to drive passion.
Yeah, well, I think passion is different for different people. I know I'm attracted to people who've got a glint in their eye that make me laugh. Right, so that works for me. I don't think that necessarily works for everyone, but certainly people who make me chuckle and who have got a cheeky glint in their eye, it's definitely an attractive quality for me.
Yeah. So here we go. The question is obviously to inspire sets the context of what you're doing in that case. So through clarity and through your life, you've obviously gone out to make that happen. So think about your dream or your revelation you had when you were in Seattle. What happened to make that come alive? Because obviously that was a realization. You had to go and do something. What was that? What was the thing that you did? What was the catalyst that made it happen?
I'm not sure that there was one thing. I think there was something which was, what was I fulfilled in my role at Microsoft? No, not really.
Yeah. Okay.
It's definitely a catalyst was becoming a father.
Okay.
Because all of a sudden you've got this responsibility, but I felt my responsibility was I needed to sort of role model what I feel what good looks like, and that is about enjoying life and taking everything the world's got to offer and experiencing that. And so I think that, I think it was about, am I having fun at work? Am I enjoying myself? Am I fulfilled? Am I being the best role model I could be? Yeah. And frankly, most probably the answers to those questions were no. So I had to do something about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because what I hear there, and I think I hear there's lots of people, is once you have that realization, you have to then go and do something about it. But some people don't take action on it because they get set in the way, they stay in that company for life because that's what they've always done. But you took action and made something different happen.
Yeah.
Okay. So talking about clarity, you run leadership programs, executive development, team development. From a coaching perspective, what are the biggest issues that people come to you with as a team that you're out there to resolve?
I think there's three things typically that teams will and leaders will sort of say where the team are challenged. One is around, you ask a team about, are you all aligned behind the same vision and goal? Yeah. More often than not, most teams will say no. Yeah. The leader will be disappointed in that answer. The leader will think that, well, I've told them. Yeah. But the fact that the leader's told them doesn't mean that they're aligned. Well, frankly, they understand it, aligned. Normally, it's a PowerPoint of a load of words that they can't remember, or they can remember a few. So that's one where you want something. So we talk about, whether we talk about a vision or a mission, or I really couldn't give a monkey's. It's about a compelling ambition that I want that team to achieve. Yeah. I look to try and sort of set a time parameter of sort of, depending on the business, but typically 2 to 3 years. And you kind of go, right, this could be the best 2 to 3 years of your working career, right? So, right, let's pull something together that you'd be all really excited about achieving, and I think it's that setting a goal that's tantalizing the out of reach. It's that bit where you kind of go, right, let's make this exciting. If you're not excited by it, well, frankly, go and find something that does excite you. Yeah, I love that. So that's the first thing, or one of the things. The second one is the team dynamics. Very rarely in teams does 1 + 1 = 3. Normally 1 + 1 in a team equals 1.5. Yeah. Because there's infighting, there's dysfunction, there's this, so and that's why often, some teams are more effective if they're working in silos, because they can just go, right, well, I don't have to talk to those other. Just get on with it. And I'll just get on with it. Yeah. But actually, if you get that, if you play to one another's strengths and you get that collaboration, you can get the 1 + 1 = 3. Yeah. But you've got to work at it, and it's not a given. And I think people take that for granted. So it's looking at the ways of working, the team principles, the dynamics, but that's frankly, it's the culture of the team, ultimately. And then lastly is the strategy, right? So have you got a clear strategy and a plan in place to execute that strategy? And it's about holding the team's feet to the fire on that. Yeah, that's because a lot of people go, well, we come up with actions, but we then don't review them, we don't follow through on them. There's not that, so it's that bit about setting high standards. And frankly, we're there to have those tough conversations in the room, call the behaviors that we think aren't, which some people frankly are nervous to. If they're in the team, they're nervous to do it. Yeah. And so that's, they're the things I think that we're typically asked to do. It's around, commitment and alignment and commitment to a compelling ambition, team dynamics, the culture, and helping the team hold their feet to the fire on delivering against the strategy and plan. Yeah. I love that. And the words you said there, alignment and commitment, I think, everyone would be nodding their head hearing that. But I think it's true, isn't it? If you can get alignment and commitment, it gives you that clarity. I look at the name of your company, clarity. It's about getting that clarity, and it comes from that alignment and commitment. Once you're aligned to it,
Life's easy, it's clear, you know where to
Yeah.
go. But the next week you said there was about holding people to account, because people come to each period of time and they haven't done it for one reason or another, and it's just excuses, and it's normally excuses. I'm too busy, I haven't had time. But actually, there's often something else that sits behind that, and that's the bit you said there about sometimes people are afraid to say it in the team environment for one or another reason.
Yeah, and I struggle with the "I'm too busy" concept. We've all got choices. We all choose how we invest our time.
Yeah.
So if I really want to hold people's feet to the fire, then they've chosen not to do that. They've chosen to do something else.
Yeah.
So then share that. Don't say you're too busy. Share the fact that you've chosen something else that you thought was more important than this. Yeah. And have that conversation. And that's the kind of conversation you need to be having in the team.
Yeah. And this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because one thing I've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, in fact, more than that, but it becomes relevant now. And I think the word that's put around is psychological safety. People don't feel they're able to say what's really going on for them for fear that could be used against them, or it'll hold them back in different ways. But I think a lot of companies are going out their way to do it. But I wonder what's your thoughts around that. First of all, the word psychological safety, but also, the mechanism of achieving it. So
for me, that's psychological safety has become a phrase, a word that's been used based on the work that Google did on Project Aristotle on how do you make a high performing team.
Yes.
Prior to that, and a model that we are fans of, Clarity, is the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which is Patrick Lencioni's, right?
Yep.
So for me, trust is at the bottom of that triangle in Lencioni's model. Psychological safety is an aspect of Aristotle's model, or Google's Aristotle's model.
Yeah.
For me, it's very much 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They're pretty much the same things.
Yeah.
So I think if you can create that level of trust and psychological safety in the room, absolutely, I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And so it's the leader's responsibility to create that environment by creating in themselves a degree of vulnerability, humility, that they allow others to feel the same.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? And allowing others to feel the same. It's very easy for a leader to say, yes, tell me everything that's going on, but actually they've got to be out there in the first place and say, this is what's going on, guys.
Yeah.
We're in it together. Let's work together.
It's model the way, right? They've got to lead by example on that. But also, if and when that someone does call something, how the leader then and other people in the team respond to that is critical. So, because they might say one thing, but actually when it happens, they might do another. So it's really important that they role model what they're talking about when those things are shared.
Yeah. And it's interesting because just now you said about accountability and commitment. And I think that's it. If you think about Lencioni's model, going from trust through conflict to that accountability and the commitment piece that sits in the middle of that, because you only get it when people are willing to disagree and commit, because they're willing to have a conversation and it helps them move forward.
Yeah. So this might not be the path you want to go, but this is what we're going to do.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's really easy to say these things, but actually to get a team to work on it is quite hard. And I always come back to Jim Collins at this stage when he talks in Good to Great, and he talks about you need the right people in the right seats on the bus.
Yeah. And
at some stage you might need to get some people off the bus.
Yeah, and often I think when yes, my experience working with leaders that you can tell sometimes when people aren't on the bus. We will have that conversation. We will give the leader our view of that.
Yeah.
And typically, our experience is the quicker the leader makes that call, the better.
Yeah, yeah, and and that's interesting, isn't it? Because often the good leaders are willing to have those conversations, but the bad leaders are the ones who keep the team alive and keep people in the team because it's a bum on a seat and they don't want to get rid of somebody. But sometimes they need to have the ability to have that candid conversation.
Yep, it's the courage to have those tough conversations, and that's not easy. Again, leadership is not an easy place to be.
Yeah,
and that's why leaders get paid the big bucks they do.
And it's interesting actually, because when you were talking about your favorite leader earlier, you said there about someone who holds you to account.
Yeah,
and I think there's a big thing there around So that leader's responsibility is, if we want to help the team move forwards, it might be in your best interest if you step off the team because you're not right here, but you could do really well over there doing something else. But we need to have those open conversations sometimes.
Absolutely.
So the other thought, just question that comes to my mind here is, talking about Google, actually, it came to mind Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor.
Yep.
And I often come across leaders who, the good ones know how to do it, but the bad ones or the junior ones aren't able to have those candid conversations. And of course, it's in that conflict piece in Lencioni's model where we can call people out on things and also give people feedback in the moment. What's your thoughts on that around, the ability of people to give candid feedback at the right moment to help people progress forwards?
I think it's vital. If you think of, the often when you're doing analogies of teams, often sports teams come to mind, and if you think of whatever team it might be, but I'm going to use football and rugby as examples. You kind of go, look, if you feel like someone's not pulling their weight or not playing particularly well, I kind of think players would give radical candor in the dressing room at half time, in the dressing room at the end of the game, or even on the pitch.
Yeah.
And typically they're young players. Now, I've also got a belief that leadership is everyone's business. It's not just the captain, if you like.
Yeah.
If I'm using that sports analogy. So, if I think about a business team, leadership is everyone's business in the team. We were all responsible for leading effectively. And so I think that ability to give radical candor is vital. However, and there is a however to it, you have got to have built the trust, the psychological safety in the room, because if you haven't built that, there could be casualties of the radical candor, and we don't want that. So, in Lencioni's model, he talks about conflict. I don't like the word conflict necessarily.
Yeah, I agree.
Because conflict to me means there's a victim. That might just be my view of it, right? But I'd prefer to maybe use a slightly softer word like challenge. But you still want that ability to call one another on stuff, on behaviours that aren't good enough for this team.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that word challenge, I think, is a much softer term, but it actually evokes the real meaning behind it. It's able to have healthy challenge and have healthy debate without fear that it's retribution that's going to come from it. So I can challenge you on your thinking. Doesn't mean I'm right or you're wrong. It's just I'm able to have that conversation openly. It's interesting you talked about, you used the word rugby. So last weekend, South Africa, New Zealand. I often come back to the book Legacy, think about some of those things, and whichever team won on Saturday, they both did really well. But I think when you think about New Zealand, we often talk about what Kerr said in his book about legacy, and that thing about everyone's in it together. We all sweep the changing rooms together. The different policies they had running to make sure the team came together. And I think there is a lot to be said from sport and building that culture from ground up. And we often come back to sports teams because that's a passion for me. But you need to have that culture in place. If you want to win, somebody's got to draw up the guidelines of how we run this business, this team, to make it the best team we can be.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about the All Blacks, they've got 15 team principles that they talk about. I think 15 is too many, but I'm not going to tell an All Black that because they're bigger than me. And number one is sweep the sheds. Number 6 is one of my favourites, which is no dickheads.
No dickheads, yeah.
And it's like it's that. And I use that as an example with teams because I like the fact that it's not corporate language, and I'm encouraging teams to use language that will mean something for them. And I genuinely believe the culture of the team will be their secret sauce. We've all heard the phrase, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. And it's true. You can have the best strategy in the world. Yeah. But if you've got dysfunctional culture, you're not going to be able to execute that strategy effectively. Yeah. So if you've got a great culture, it doesn't necessarily mean delivering results because there are no guarantees, as you can see in every sports game, right? And it'll be the same in business. There are no guarantees, but if you are putting the right things in place, you are increasing your probability of high performance.
Yeah, I think that's true, actually. And it's interesting, isn't it? I often use the Legacy book, but also Culture Code from many years ago Yeah, about building culture from ground up and looking at things there. And one of the companies I worked with in about 2016, they built their own culture code. And Lee, who now runs another business very successfully, he took that no dickheads policy as one of his views. You know, how do we get everybody on the bus that we want to work with? How do we build a team around the right people? But he also wanted to make sure he had people in that team who would challenge him, because he realized that actually sometimes when you were building a team, if you built a team of people just like me, actually you didn't have that challenge there. So he went out of his way to find different people with different skills and different opinions. And I think that's one of the things I see a lot in businesses, where you build a team up or the board is made up of me too people. And there's no difference there. And therefore you don't get the richness of debate that you really need in a team to make it really come alive.
Yeah, you know, there was a wonderful phrase that came up in our team meeting last week, which was, you know, diversity of strength, but similarity of spirit. Yeah, and it really stuck with all of us. Yeah. You know, we loved it. You know, which is, you want that diversity of styles and strengths and thinking, but a unity and a similarity of spirit.
Yeah, and to me, that's what purpose does. I think purpose, you know, we may not have exactly the same purpose, but if we're on the same guideline, we're in the same arena, having the same vision of what we want to achieve, actually, that's where that diversity of spirit can really come alive. Similarity of spirit, should I say, can really bring people alive.
Yeah.
There's a great thing there. So thinking about your journey over the last, you say 2012, setting up Clarity. So you've been on this journey for 15 years or so.
2009 we set up Clarity.
2009, okay. If you could go back to the beginning and do things differently, is there anything you would change?
What, to the start of Clarity?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I'm really happy with where the business is and what we're doing. Our brand and reputation in the marketplace. You know, does it mean that everything's perfect? No. But I'm not sure what I would do differently, Phil. No, it's a good question. You can clearly see it's got me thinking. Don't know. But I'm certainly very happy with where we're at. You know, and I'm certainly not saying it's perfect. There's lots of things I'm wanting to do differently now, and we've got those in place. But I also think you learn from, you know, as you go. So. Yeah. I'm happy with where we're at, and I'm happy with where we're going.
Yeah, I think, and actually, there's a lot to be said for that, isn't it? Because it's a tough call building your own business. You know, you came from a corporate. I came from a corporate, and in a corporate, you don't see all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes as the founder of the business. It's only when you step into the founder's shoes you realize what it's like running a business from ground up, effectively. But I always ask that question: you know, what would you do differently? And then the question that often comes on the back of that is around, you know, going back to your younger self and giving yourself some advice. So I wonder what that would be. What's the advice you would give the younger Phil Rose?
I think it would most probably be take a bit more risk. I feel like I was quite conservative in my career early days.
Yeah. Okay.
And I do think there's a massive aspect in leadership and risk taking, and the ability to, you know, manage risk and what level of risk. And I think it would most probably be more daring.
Yeah, I love that. Be more daring. That's interesting. I was listening to an interview recently with somebody, and I don't know the name, but she was a top class poker player. And one of the reasons she said she went into it is because she thought, for one, poker playing was a man's game, so she wanted to break into that world. But when she was asked similar questions, she said, look, about risk, she says, I now view poker was about me understanding risk. Yeah. And now I've played poker to a top level. I don't see anything but risk, but I look at how to manage it, and then I look at what the outcome would be, and then I put actions in place to manage my risks.
Yeah.
And I thought that's an interesting thing.
I think there's a massive correlation, not necessarily in poker, but with leadership. But maybe there is. I hadn't thought about that analogy with poker and leadership. I'm not sure we want to get into that debate of potentially gambling, but it's like, but it is about managing risk. Yeah, leadership and risk are hand in hand.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually, because I used to work at Rolls-Royce, and one of the projects I worked on, I worked with an exceptional risk manager. A lot of people would say he was quite dull, but actually what he was calculating and very deep thinking. So he was a very steady person in that sense when I said that. But what this guy used to do was basically look at all the risks that what could happen, and then look at all the mitigating actions we need to put in place to minimize our risk and look at maximizing the upside. And I think from an aerospace point of view, that was one of the key things he worked on. And I think you're right, from a leadership point of view, especially running the business and putting strategies in place, there is risk inherent in everything you do.
Yeah, yeah, there is. And I think there's also that piece on the flip side. It's like, well, if you can imagine that this is going to go well, would you do it? And, obviously the answer to that is yes. So it's like, well, then have a go. Right. So, because there's no guarantees whether it will go well or not. But, but if you can imagine that, if you could predict that you would be successful, would you do it? The answer to that is going to be yes. So therefore, just have a go. You might be successful, you might not, but you'll learn loads in the process.
Yeah. And actually, I think there's obviously a lot to be said for that in terms of that entrepreneurial vision. Learn loads in the process, because then you can always take that learning to the next piece of advice. What do you do with it? How do you make the next decision?
And I think that's when, when you ask me, would I do anything differently? I think that's why I struggled, because even the things that didn't go well, or when you learned from them, and therefore it got you stronger. You did things differently, and when the pandemic hit, I hated it, for a month. I really did. I didn't enjoy my job for the first time in ages. But then I kind of learned from it, and I thought, right, let's reframe it as an opportunity. And all of a sudden, you've reframed your business, and consequently, post pandemic, we've seen great growth.
Yeah, that's
and so I think that's why I struggled, because anything that didn't go well, I learned from it, and so therefore I looked at that as a good thing.
Yeah, but it's interesting, because what I hear is that growth mindset. At the end of the day, looking at it from you could sit and wallow in the fact you didn't enjoy your job for a while, but actually then you looked at it from a different perspective and say, I hear almost the word, what can I do differently? And it's that growth mindset to move yourself forwards is needed.
Yeah, and I looked at it almost as a challenge, and I certainly was I went through the victim sort of cycle.
Yeah, okay.
And all the things where I didn't recognize it, and blah blah, but I got myself out of it, and as a result, we're in a strong position.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, actually, and it's interesting, actually. I think a lot of people in the pandemic went through that victim mindset piece at the beginning as well. What not a lot of people did the next step, which was look at how do you flip that round and come up with the other side. Look at how to pivot your business or change your mindset to come out with what do we need to do differently.
Yeah, that came from me by I had the opportunity. One of the beauties of the pandemic was nobody was traveling, so there's got lots of good mates that senior roles in corporates, and all of a sudden I could go and meet them on a mountain bike early in the morning, and we could go out for a pedal and chat about stuff, and so it was those kind of conversations that firstly kept me sane, but that really started to ignite some sparks in what's possible.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it sounds like it's going great guns since then. So that's always the conversations on the mountain bikes led to a lot of good things.
It is going great now, but you never rest on your laurels, and I'm not necessarily driven by the numbers, but you want the business to grow, because if you're not intending it to grow, it's inevitably going to go backwards.
Yeah, flatlining eventually. So this has been a wonderful conversation, just in terms of just learning about your history, the ethos, and I love the fact at the end of the day there's a commonality of purpose. How that word inspire. We talked a bit about teams and engagement and leadership. I wonder, what's the final question I've got is, what's the bit of advice you would give an upcoming leader, or someone's making that transition into leadership now? What advice would you give them to help them on that journey of where they want to go to next?
I think it's around authenticity, and be clear on who you are and what you stand for and what's important to you. Don't lead in the way in which you've been led, because that would have worked for that person. It might not work for you.
Yeah.
And I think therefore it's about be clear on what's important to you, and make sure you lead that way, and so that you're leading in the most authentic way possible.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful, isn't it? Because we hear that word authenticity a lot, but actually what you're saying there is lead in your way, the way that
Yeah,
way that works for you.
Leading the way in which you want to lead, not in the way in which you've been led.
Yeah.
Because the way in which you've been led might have worked for some other person, but
Yeah.
it might not work for you.
Yeah,
and so lead in your own style.
Yeah, I love that, and I think a lot of people can learn from that actually, where they've tried to do something differently and they struggle because they're not playing it in the same way. They haven't got the same characteristics as that other person. They've not learned it in the same way. So Phil Rose, thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it. How would people find you if they want to go and look up Phil Rose Clarity Leadership as opposed to Phil Rose Ignium? How would they find Phil Rose?
Yeah, well, so it's clarityleadership.co.uk. And you know, and like you, Phil, have already also got a podcast.
Yes.
So look, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you. But yeah, clarityleadership.co.uk.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, look, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I wish you well. I hope to meet you one day again. And final question: are you still running? You said you're mountain biking, still running?
Yeah. Look, so I try and do one run, one cycle, one swim, and one kayak a week. That's that now. Does that happen? No, not always. But so I like the variety. So yeah. I wouldn't call it running. I would call it more of a plod at the moment. I seem to carrying an extra few kilos, pick up some injuries, but no, I still like to run. I run with the dog. I plod with the dog. And cycle, swim, and kayak.
Yeah, and I love the fact you're bringing the kayak in there as well. That's very different. It's something I don't do and haven't done for many years, but that sounds
living by the river here, and you know, it's great. It's just a great way to experience something very, very different.
Yeah.
And see the world in a, you know, and the river in a different light.
I think I love that actually. You know, I do a lot of swimming in the river, and of course, in the river swimming, you don't really see the river. You just see.
No, you don't see a lot when you're that down. But yeah, and obviously, what's exploded has been paddleboarding. You know, and you get an even better view on a paddleboard than what you do a kayak.
Yeah, very true actually. Yeah, that's another thing for next summer to pick up on. So, anyway, Phil, it's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Yeah, cheers, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you.